Hello. I was, of course, managed to be in the wrong space. I was thought it is sufficient to be in the stage A, but I was not in the right place. Good to see you, everybody. I hope you're getting prepared. Good morning. So we have actually only 1 minute to go. I know there were some technical challenges in sharing the slides in the last session, I noticed. So I was just wondering if you want to, we can also try to do it here. I would prefer if all speakers could do that, but let me know if your internet connection is not good enough. So we'll do it from here. And
We've tested them, Maria, and it seems okay. But as you rightly know, Nairobi can be unpredictable. So
Hello,
if
Mr.
we do get into a challenge.
Nutinen. This is Arnold from Smart Events, your technical help. So the first part will be a video that I want to share. So if you want to, you can start with this session and I will play the first video.
Well, let me start. Actually, we have a little bit of a different order on things. So I will just invite you to play the video for Laura then.
Okay, wonderful.
All right, thanks a lot. And welcome everybody. So I think we're up on the hour. We can start now official part of the session. We have our key speakers here on the video, and we have also Laura Villegas from our team. Thanks a lot also for Julie from UNEP and Elizabeth, who've been contributing to the organization of this session. Let me know if you hear some background noise from me, but I try to solve that after this introduction. So just very briefly, we wanted to bring you all here to discuss and share about finance options for wet livelihoods from peatlands. And this is why we are here. This request came to us also from Indonesia as to support Indonesian government for identifying best finance options for different sources for developing wet livelihood sources for peatlands managed in wet conditions, normally restored peatlands. So we heard already this morning keynote speakers about what is a sustainable wet management practice, and we'll hear. Sorry about, let me know. I'll just check the chat. Let me know if there is a lot of background noise because I hear a lot. But see if you don't. Okay, perfect. Then we just carry on. So we wanted to have a participatory session. We invited here also participants from Indonesia, from DRC, so Democratic Republic of the Congo, Peru, and Indonesia. And of course, we have a very international audience already in the chat, as I see from there. So the key objectives of this short session is to identifying sustainable finance sources and other resources for wet peatland management, for advancing with long-term sustainable finance options, livelihood options, taking advantage of the advances with wet peatland management in general. We'll share very good examples from different continents on different finance sources, activities that have been implemented, and our speakers here will share more on that. This is just to set the stage because we really want to have this as a participatory session. So please be prepared to write your questions in the chat. We'll take them from there. Unfortunately, there will not be raising hands on that sort of participatory functions here. We won't see you either. So please be present through the chat. So first of all, if I may invite participants, if you want to introduce yourself very briefly, if you have any special experience on finance or funding resource mobilization that you would like to share, please be ready to share that. Without further ado, I will just hand over to Laura Villegas, who is presenting on behalf of my team here at FAO. Sorry, 1 moment. I'm just going to present you all speakers very briefly, just right before the presentations. So Laura works here with us as an international consultant specialized in peatlands. She has a both environmental engineering background as well as a master in landscape ecology and nature conservation. Laura has worked extensively in Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as in the Congo, Indonesia, and Peru with my team. So Laura is supporting in general the peatland mapping, monitoring, as well as practices work stream, and has focused also on resource mobilization. Over to you, Laura, and so thanks a lot for playing the video now from the support. Thanks.
Good morning to all participants, organizers, and partners of this talk. Today, I will make a short introduction to the finance options for wet peatland management based on the GPI Global Consultations. My name is Laura Villegas, and I work at FAO together with the coordinator of Peatland work, Maria Nutinen, and Elizabeth Rams. Today, we would like to focus the discussion on what are the practitioners' needs in terms of finance. So, as we all know, sustainable options are needed to support livelihood that help maintain peatlands wet. And re-wetting helps with reducing greenhouse gas emissions, fires, and subsidence, and prevent the loss of livelihoods, and giving the small area of peatlands worldwide, this is the most efficient option in terms of the money invested. So it gives the best value for the money. Therefore, practitioners and countries appeal for innovative solutions that ensure sustainable livelihoods for communities and secure ecosystem services at the same time. And in many cases, over the years, we have come to the conclusion that the landscape approach and the empowerment of local communities is the way to go to manage peatlands. Ecology and finance are both needing a landscape scale approach. Peatlands are in many cases large and complex systems with interconnected hydrology. This means that social, economic, and ecological variables need long-term monitoring, assessment, but also long-term financing at scale. Sustainable management of peatlands is about maintaining the three key factors: the water, the peat body, and the vegetation that forms the peat in wet conditions. And maintaining these three key factors helps to secure the ecosystem services, and also by using some of the above ground biomass without harming the preservation of the peat body, we can help secure livelihoods and fight poverty. With this context, we started our global consultations to discuss the challenges and opportunities of sustainable peatland management and identification of technical and knowledge gaps among professionals. For this consultations, we've had 10 online webinars, and there are more in the planning. We've had over 500 participants in total, mostly in our focal countries: Peru, Republic of Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Indonesia. And we also launched the Peatlands Needs Assessment Survey, which we have so far approximately 300 respondents, practitioners coming from all over the world and working in different types of peatlands worldwide. The results of this assessment help us to identify key issues for the process of development of national capacities and to provide information to make informed decisions when planning peat-related actions. So one of the findings of the needs assessment was to discover the relevance of the work on livelihoods and financial mechanisms for the organizations working worldwide on peatland landscapes, where 31% of organizations are working in the development of livelihoods, 41% in the economic valuation of peatland ecosystem services, and we could also see that not a lot are currently working in the subject of financial mechanisms and investments, only 14%. So why is this? Most participants identified the clear need for more tools, sources of knowledge, and information on methods on these same topics. The number one challenge identified by practitioners is the lack of resources, and also it's the priority type of support needed, finance and funding. Some of the respondents' suggestions include government funding for peat restoration, research and education funding for peatland mapping, also long-term funding, including below ground monitoring, financial incentives, and economically competitive alternative commodities. So to increase the knowledge base, we have in the project launched the template to document sustainable wet livelihoods on peatland landscapes. And it's now available in 3 languages. So we encourage all participants with inspiring cases of renewable resources and practices on peatlands to submit your cases, which will be published and will contribute to improving the knowledge base and also provide information on potential financial sources to apply for these types of projects worldwide. So I would like to end my talk and give the floor to my colleagues with some recommendations that we've heard from practitioners worldwide. So it's important to pay attention to the development of sustainable value chains, including marketing, and to allow communities to access these markets and also the private sector to generate viable sources of revenue. Peatlands should be managed through a landscape approach, which includes leadership of local communities and understanding of the interconnected hydrological system of a peatland. And through the Global Peatlands Initiative, practitioners and organizations are looking to showcase sustainable practices and to exchange and inspire others. So I will leave these important links in the presentation that will be shared with all of you. And I thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Laura. Thank you so much. And I know that we have a bit of a tight schedule here, so I will just hand over to Diana next. And while you're sharing your screen, I give a short intro. So Diana is coordinator of the Global Peatlands Initiative in the biodiversity and works in the biodiversity and land management branch at the UN Environment Program in Kenya. She's an expert in ecosystems and biodiversity and delivers a suite of landscape management and climate change programs, bringing science to policy to contribute to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. Diana has worked in Africa, especially for 20 years on a range of issues within the emergency, humanitarian and development sector. For UNEP, she works globally and has led teams, for example, under the UN RED program, among others. Over to you, Diana.
Thanks so much. Can you hear me well?
Very well.
Thanks very much. So good day, everyone, and thanks so much for having me. My name's Diana Kopansky, and as Maria mentioned, I lead on behalf of the United Nations Environment Program, the Global Peatlands Initiative. It's a partnership that's working to save peatlands as the world's largest terrestrial organic carbon stock, and UNEP uses a special approach. We use South-South collaboration for the implementation of the Global Peatlands Initiative project, which is directly supporting 4 key tropical peatland countries of Indonesia, Peru, the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Republic of Congo. And we also support countries all over the world. But our work so far has been really recognized for the South-South approach as a best practice, not only within UNEP, but also across the entire UN system. Global Peatlands Initiative was launched at the COP in Marrakesh at the end of 2016 after the challenges that Indonesia was facing with the Indonesian peatland fires. They called partners to action, and it started with a partnership of 13 founding members and has grown to 40 international partner organizations. Our diversity is our asset, both in partnerships experience, but also for the regions that we work in and we come from. And success for emission reduction on a global scale requires global action on peatlands, built on experience and approaches from science to policy, innovation to financing. We really do need to deliver quick and significant wins for climate action on the ground through peatlands sustainable management. Keeping peat carbon in the ground is crucial if the world is to meet our global target. We can't take business as usual, we have to take business unusual. And in order to do this, the Global Peatlands Initiative Partnership has identified 4 priority work areas. Each partner is working together in their areas of strength to know where peatlands are and how they're changing, identify productive uses and drainage-free livelihoods. We're working with countries to develop and put in place policies, laws, and institutional frameworks. And we're also working to identify financial solutions and instruments to develop ways that both private and public sectors can invest in healthy peatlands now and in the future. One of these intervention areas is the financial solutions. This is what we're talking about today. Of course, unfortunately, peatlands are still being degraded and drained all over the world. And being such important ecosystems, we really need to ensure that there's financial mechanisms as well as governance mechanisms to keep them intact and also support their restoration. The Global Peatlands Initiative is working together to convey to partners and governments that peatlands rewetting, restoration, conservation also offers a low-cost, low-tech, and high-impact nature-based solution for climate action. There's evidence that benefits of protecting and restoring peatlands outweigh the costs. And peatlands are vitally important, of course, to human societies, not only for their health elements, but also for their cultural heritage. Research has shown that conserving and restoring peatlands is an effective, but also currently underutilized pathway to reduce emissions and mitigate against climate change. And research has also suggested that peatlands conservation and restoration can be economically justified based on greenhouse gas emissions savings alone. Inclusion of water management benefits reinforces this case significantly. For example, in 2011, the UK National Ecosystem Assessment calculated that the benefit of peatlands bring to water quality in the UK are £1.5 billion per year, and the amenity benefits a further £1.3 billion. The UK water companies are also now considering peatlands restoration action as a cost-effective alternative to treating brown water. Some companies in the UK are already invested in this restoration because it's cheaper and more effective than the cost of cleaning water. UNEP, through our land use finance program, has been working to proactively unlock and scale up private finance for sustainable land use by supporting a number of blended finance vehicles and by focusing on creating an enabling environment. By leveraging and unlocking private finance for sustainable commodity production, the approach helps to improve rural livelihoods, protect forests, including forested peatlands, and helps to restore degraded lands. By partnering directly with private sector entities, including banks, in the agricultural and financial industries, UNEP supports member states as they transition towards sustainable land use by providing these financial incentives to smallholder farmers, supply chain companies, traders, institutions, and systematically including climate and deforestation zero targets. Some examples that I'd like to share with you today are the And Green Fund and the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility. The And Green Fund aims to catalyze private finance for sustainable agriculture, commodity production, and it's be decoupled from deforestation and drainage and degradation of peatlands. While the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility leverages public funding from Indonesia to unlock private finance for sustainable land use, including in agriculture and ecosystem restoration, and for investments in renewable energies. The TLFF is innovative as it coordinates cross-functionality between the government of Indonesia, the private sector, and communities to foster large-scale positive change in the country. More about the And Green Fund. UNEP and the And Green Fund includes measures and criteria to promote the protection and restoration of forests and peatlands for the benefits of people, the climate, biodiversity, and food and water security. And the And Green Fund is investing in inclusive agriculture, protecting forest, and stopping peatlands drainage and degradation. They invest in commercial projects in agricultural production value chains, and they also intend to catalyze investment into jurisdictions where local authorities are also committed to the restoration and efforts for deforestation to reduce deforestation. And they're actively taking steps to work with private sectors, communities, civil societies. The Anne Green Fund was established as a Dutch foundation in 2017. It currently has $125 million in capital, and it's committed through contributions from the Norwegian International Climate Forest Initiative and Unilever combined. This fund is helping to provide an example for other private banks to follow by bringing key players together and also supporting transformation towards land use and agricultural production models that better balance the need to protect forests and their peatlands while improving livelihoods and enhancing efficiency and yields to produce enough food for a growing world population. The Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility supports deforestation-free supply chains through strict lending criteria. It aims to mobilize international capital at scale to incentivize sustainable agriculture and renewable energy in Indonesia. And we really hope to decrease the environmental damage that often accompanies business as usual by supporting unique investment setups like this. ADM Capital manages the Tropical Landscapes Finance Facility, and BNP Paribas arranges the long-term commercial pricing and long tenure debt for individual projects. We also have UNEP involved, ECRAF, and USAID is also one of the lenders that is helping to de-risk these projects. Finance can only be successful when it's enabled through good governance, and it's also combined with incentives that line up with private sector and public sector's priorities. It also has to be based on strong science really to achieve the proper impactful results. And after more than a decade of working toward qualifying for payments under the REDD+ platform scheme, Indonesia received its first results-based financial rewards last year. Initially, the REDD+ scheme was conceived as a market-based means for industrialized countries to pay forest-rich countries for their emissions reductions and contributions to meeting their overall global climate targets through financial credits. However, this concept didn't really materialize, and instead, most of the rewards are funded by donors, including the Norwegian International Climate and Forest Initiative and the Green Climate Fund. And the financing, this is financed through UNFCCC. Indonesia applied to receive the REDD+ results-based payments based on their most recent data, which illustrates its efforts to curb emissions under their detailed bilateral partnership. And in May, Norway approved a payment of $56 million for emissions reductions. Among the various institutions, some fiscal instruments introduced by the Indonesian Ministry of Finance to also reward environmentally friendly industrial players were effective, according to the ministry. And these incentives, providing tax holdings for pioneer industries, tax allowances, import duties, and value-added tax exemptions for renewable sector, are really quite important. New business permits in forested areas and peatland drainage were halted, and certification standards for timber products were also imposed.
Thanks.
Despite the successes,
Diana, time to wrap up. Thanks.
No problem. Despite the successes, there are still challenges for results-based payments. We also need to have financing for peatlands conservation and think of new ways beyond commodities to protect these special places like the Cuvette Centrale peatlands. And UNEP and the Global Peatlands Initiative partners are working together to knit together these special financing opportunities, the Global Environment Facility, Green Climate Fund, CAFI, NICFI, USAID, and the International Climate Initiative supported by Germany. So please join us and be part of the solution with the Global Peatlands Initiative. We welcome all of your understanding and your expertise in this emerging and important area of work together. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot. We're having a wonderful kickstart from Laura and Diana. Thanks a lot, Diana, for this presentation. There are already some questions in the chat, and I would invite more. I didn't see any clarifying questions for Diana, so I think we dive deep into Paul Chatterton's presentation next. Paul, before I hand over to you, you may want to start screen sharing already. I'm just going to introduce Paul very briefly here. Paul is the lead and founder of the Landscape Finance Lab, a global platform for incubating and financing sustainable landscapes linked to conservation organization, the WWF. During an extensive career with WWF, Paul has catalyzed already results, including first provincial scale forest and climate REDD+ program in Africa, Europe's longest river protected area, and the largest. Sorry, I hear some background noise. I'm just checking whose microphone it might be.
That may be my computer, Maria. I'm very sorry.
No problem, no problem. I think we can live with that. Not too loud. I thought it was a woman's voice, that's why I asked. And finally, in addition to the Europe's longest river protected area, the largest rainforest reserve in the Pacific. So that's an impressive thing. And I know that the Landscape Finance Lab has been doing impressive things as well. So we're looking forward to your presentation. Over to you, Paul.
Lovely, thanks, Maria. And hello, Peatlanders. Great to be with you. So I want to take you through a little bit of the lessons that we've gathered in landscape finance as we've been working over the last 4 years since the Landscape Finance Lab was set up. We're an innovation unit within WWF, but we'll be spinning off this year. I think there's some models for financing peatland restoration at a much larger scale than we have been seeing, and I just want to explore two aspects. The shift to working at the landscape approach with the landscape approach and what that means, and then how we bring commercial finance into landscapes as well as into projects. So those two shifts in conservation I'll look at. The first one, going to landscape. So the main tool that all conservation organizations use is the project, which has been very successful at winning many battles for nature, but it's failed dismally in terms of winning the war. Nature's going back rapidly. So we're retooling around landscapes. WWF certainly is, and many other conservation organizations are, and I think the world of multilaterals and governments is going in this direction as well. And the reason is because landscapes allow us to operate and think at the scale of nature, ecoregions. They allow us to connect the local and the national. They allow us to combine finance types, which we'll talk about in a minute. And importantly, they allow people working in different sectors to speak with a common language. We found this when we were writing the little sustainable landscape book, which was launched by 15 organizations at the Paris COP in 2015. When we looked at the world of landscape approaches, we found that climate smart agriculture is not so different from catchment management, is not so different from renewable energy or integrated coastal zone management. The processes are the same, the content is slightly different, the topic that you're dealing with. So what we proposed was a 5-step methodology that for integrated landscape management. And the theory is that if you go through that methodology with your landscape, you achieve sustainability. A sustainable landscape is a landscape that meets the SDGs. And if we have enough sustainable landscapes, we meet the global goals across the planet. That's the theory. We're a fair distance from that at the moment, of course. I won't go into the details of the theory, but just to say that the 5 elements are really just the project cycle, but with an important difference, that you start with a multi-stakeholder platform. You bring the stakeholders together in the landscape, they define the problem, the underlying causes of the problem solution pathways, a vision, an action plan, and the monitoring framework, and they manage it. And that's a very different thing to a project. It's a long-term, large-scale, locally owned system for dealing with nature. And there's a lot more work going on with the 1,000 Landscapes Consortium. I encourage you to look this up. We're bringing together many more organisations, including all of them represented here, to further define and simplify the SDGs. The 4 returns methodology is a very nice way of doing that. To take the CBD's 3 zones, you can have many more zones if you want, but if we've got a common language on zoning, it helps, and so on. So that's landscapes, an integrated solution, large, holistic, high impact, and allowing us to think about a different way of financing conservation and peatlands. So that's the other shift that's going on at the moment, from conservation work being done out of the piggy bank to conservation being done by and with real banks, as Diana was saying, with BNP Paribas in Indonesia. And I think it's a great case study. Here's why we want to make that shift. This is a picture of the world's global flows of money, about $200 trillion a year. And when you look at where our organizations work, and most of us here in this conference, it's only really in this little red bar down in the bottom right, global overseas aid and foundation philanthropy, a bit of government money as well. But there's this vast area of money here that could be applied to conservation and specifically to peatlands. And one way that one of the most exciting areas where that's happening is in the bond world. Bonds are just groupings of loans, and a green bond is a grouping of loans that meets some environmental objective, emission reductions or water improvement or whatever. Been a dramatic increase in the number of green bonds, the scale of green bonds in the last decade, from $2 billion to now $1 trillion worth of bonds. But what's very interesting is that, up until the last couple of years, almost all of the money in bonds was going to energy, buildings, transport, which isn't very exciting for nature. But what is happening now is that you're getting land use and water bonds coming down the pipeline. And that's perfect for peatlands, and something we have to think about. How do we tool ourselves up to be able to access this? The big challenge is that the bankers don't get out of bed for less than $100 million, and we're nowhere near that scale. When you look at the conservation organisations, we're lucky if we're working at the $1 million scale. If we get up to the $10 million scale, we're doing very nicely. The 100 million is a real stretch. How do we work at the scale, at that scale? We do it by bundling projects, by grouping them together, and I'll give you a couple of examples of that. This is a carbon project in the Democratic Republic of Congo that has $170 million investment. It's basically bundling together forestry projects, conservation projects, forest restoration, sustainable agriculture, charcoal production, and a number of other things. It bundles them together. There's 15 different partners who are implementing that, and it aims to achieve emission reductions equivalent to the city of Cape Town and protection of an area of forest the size of Greece. And that's starting to happen. I heard from a friend who's just come back from here that the forests are regrowing, the water's flowing, women are walking less distance to get their water, and so on. We heard from Diana about the Tropical Landscape Finance Facility in Jambi, and I think this really is a groundbreaker, because what that does, carbon payments are, in some ways, they're not too different from grants, except that you only get the money if you deliver the results. But this TLF, this Jambi project, is genuinely commercial. It has public investment to get it started and a USAID guarantee, but there's a lot of commercial money in here. And again, what this does is bundle a set of activities. So with Michelin Tire Company, their main aim is to transition their rubber plantations to be more wildlife friendly, more sustainable. But in the process, by building this sustainability bond, they're also able to invest in neighbouring rainforest restoration programs, smallholder rubber production, and help the protected area to the north, which contains tigers, orangutans, and elephants. So really quite an exciting structure. And here's the theory of how this works. So just generally, if you think about your own projects, so there's grant projects, if you think about how this works for peatlands, you take a set of activities within a landscape, capacity building, re-wetting, and so forth, all of those are grant financed, and group them together with commercial activities, timber production, polluticulture, ecotourism. It depends on the landscape. And you could stop there. You could work on those on an individual basis. But what's exciting if you work at the landscape level is that you can then structure instruments that hold those and can invest in more projects and bring more money. They might be funds, facilities, bonds, whatever. We're doing exactly this in Fiji at the moment. The Great Sea Reef Resilience Program is managed by initially 15 partners, and now there's many more involved. They have an overall vision, and they have a public investment program. $30 million is being sought at the moment from the Green Climate Fund to establish reef governance similar to the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority. It'll be very different in Fiji, but that's the idea. And then parallel to that is a commercial investment facility called Matanataki, which invests directly into green projects that help reef resilience.
So, yeah, two minutes again left. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Well, I've got 3 slides. I think I'm right. So there's a couple of examples in Europe that are developing, particularly for peatlands. This one in the Flow Country. Rene was part of our visioning workshop last November. And the peat country is 400,000 hectares. It holds twice the amount of carbon as all of the woodlands and forests of the United Kingdom combined. There's a lot of money flows available for this, but the question is how to aggregate those at a scale that really makes a difference and that attracts the bankers and the commercial finance, and that's what we're doing in the next step. And in Ireland, we're about to start a process with the Irish government and the European Investment Bank to look at how to create a financing system for peatlands across Western Ireland, particularly from carbon, but it'll go further than that. And this targets particularly the active raised bogs, which the majority of which are of Europe's active raised bogs are in Ireland. So I'll stop there. If you want to get involved in landscape finance and peatlands, a couple of things to consider. Find partners who are willing to work at the landscape scale. You've got to be able to think at that level. You do need clear business cases that will make money. That's not so simple. You need long-term seed grant funding because this is a marathon to build one of these things. And you need to have some financial literacy, but even more valuable is to work with partners who are in the finance world who really know how to do these things. Don't try and do it yourself. So thank you. I'll hand back to Maria, and the Landscape Finance Lab is set up specifically to help teams on the ground build these sorts of things. So do let us know if we can help at all.
And you also have a wonderful platform for that, where practitioners and different projects are exchanging and kind of an incubator indeed. So I recommend also the Peatland actors to have a look at that. So now, thanks. We have our last presentation, and so be prepared for an intensive discussion after this. Before I let loose René, I will just give a little intro. Thanks a lot. I see you already sharing your screen. So René Kerkvliet-Hermans works at the IUCN, is the Pitlin Code coordinator for the IUCN UK Peatland program. Really a special and a forerunner in many ways for national scale programs. And the program promotes peatland restoration in the United Kingdom. The program advocates the multiple benefits of peatlands through partnerships, strong science, sound policy, and effective practice. So we'll hear now more about the Peatlan Code, a voluntary certification standard for UK peatland projects wishing to market the climate benefits of peatland restoration. So over to you, René. I'm happy to hear more and before we head for the discussion. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you very much, Maria. So yes, I am going to talk you through how we are bringing in private funding into peatland restoration in the UK. So first, let me just quickly set the scene. So in the UK, around 10% of our peatland, of the UK is covered in peatlands, but unfortunately, about 80% of that of those peatlands are in a modified state. So public finance can't fix the scale that is needed. So hence we are needing private investment to restore these degraded peatlands. And luckily there are lots of businesses that want to engage with this. So what is the Peatlan Code? So the Peatlan Code is a voluntary certification standard to attract private funding for peatland restoration projects in exchange for climate benefits by providing assurances to buyers. It's a project that is developed and managed by the IUCN UK Peatland Programme. It was launched in 2015, so it's still relatively new. And we develop and manage the code as a standard, but we do not get involved in projects. However, we do provide some technical support to projects if that's needed. So the Peatlan Code is UK-based. It's about reducing greenhouse gas emissions via peatland restoration. It does not include account for carbon already stored in the peatlands, and that is to do with additionality. So businesses that buy peatland credits, they need to know that their money was actually used to reduce emissions, and the carbon already stored in peatlands is not additional. So their money doesn't buy that. The Peatlan Code uses a number of eligibility criteria, and a number of legal and financial tests are in place. We have a rigorous internal and external governance and an independent certification body. We've got government-led science, so that's really important. It's based on government-led science. We are at the moment working to getting UCAS accredited, and it's all about boutique carbon. So the code quantifies the carbon, but obviously peatland restoration has lots of other benefits as well that can be communicated to investors. For example, water quality, food, biodiversity, and culture. So just very briefly, how does the Peatlan Code work? So it is a project. Sorry, I did something wrong on my screen. Sorry. So first projects, when a project has a peatland site that they want to restore, they register that project on the UK Land Carbon Registry under the Peatlan Code. Then they do all the paperwork, and then they go for project validation. That's where an independent auditor goes to site and checks the baseline of the site, and they also check over all the paperwork and the proposals of restoration. If they're happy, you get your project validation certificate, and your pending units are issued at this stage. And you can already sell those units at that moment if you want, so you can raise money for your capital work. Then you go away, you do your restoration. Then within 1 year of finishing your restoration, you get a restoration validation. That's where the independent auditor comes on site again to check that you've done all the restoration you said you would do and that all looks good. And then after 5 years of finishing restoration, you get your first verification. Again, the independent auditor will come onto site to check that everything still looks as it should, that you are indeed restoring the site. And at this point, your units, your pending units from year 0 to year 5, so that first chunk then gets converted into verified peatland carbon units. And after this, you get verifications every 10 years. So all of this is now done on the UK Land Carbon Registry. At the end of last year, the Pitlin Code joined the Woodland Carbon Code onto this IHS market registry. So we've now created a one-stop shop for woodland and peatland carbon schemes, which is really great. It also helps for the transparency and avoidance of double counting, and also the traceability for all units. So this is a great improvement for the Peatland Code. So how does a Peatland Code work with public finance? So under the Peatland Code, it is required that you have at least 15% of your whole project duration comes from carbon finance. So it also means that up to 85% of your funding over the whole project can come from public finance. You do, however, still get 100% of the credits as a landowner. So it's a really good scheme to get into now. So costs for this, of these 15 and 85% include site survey and preparation, restoration and management activities for the project duration. So what kind of support is out there for projects? If projects want to, they don't have to, but they can have some intermediaries helping them. So there are project developers working in the area that can help landowners to develop all the necessary paperwork, and also our brokers working in the areas. So there are different types of brokers. Some have also a project developer role. Some are just acting like retail aggregators, for example, where they buy and sell units. And then different ways of paying for these services, like some take a percentage cut and some just are included in the price that you get for your unit. So there's all different ways that this can work. So is there investor demand? Yes, there is luckily a very large investor demand who are interested in the Peatland story, which is great news. However, since we only started in 2015 and our projects from restoration, it takes at least 5 years after you get your first verified units. It means that we do not have any verified units on the books at the moment. So there's a time lag in delivery of verified units, and companies can only make official offset claims on verified units and not on these pending units. The pending units are more a promise that these emission reductions will happen, but have not happened yet. So you cannot make any official claims on that. So at the moment, we are working hard on getting more projects on the books, obviously, and also telling all these companies that do want to get involved that they need to get involved now. There are lots of companies in the UK who have set themselves ambitious targets of net zero by 2030. So we are communicating to them that if they want that, they need to get involved now with the Pitlin Code and fund restoration at the moment. So this is just an example project, just to give you an idea of how does it actually look like. So this is a project in Scotland, Tala and Games Hope Estate. They only used a very small percentage of public funding. So 7.8% of the whole project cost came from Peatland Action in this case. So that's the Scottish public funding. And carbon funding made up 92.2% of the whole project. They are restoring just over 100 hectares, and they've gone into a contract for 100 years. So restoration here.
Sorry, Renee, just 1 minute to go. Thanks a lot.
Thanks. So restoration, what they're doing is they're vegetating the haggery profiling and deer management, and the restoration is almost done at this site. When they're done, they have a claimable emissions reductions of over 18,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. So that's a lot a lot of emissions reductions. And this particular project is project managed by the Program Forest Carbon. So they're involved in there. So what are the next steps for us? So obviously increasing project supply, which locally is being very successful. In the last year, we doubled our projects on the books, but I'm working hard to make that even more. Marketing of PIUs and the benefits for early adopters. And we are also exploring a Pitlin carbon guarantee to help boost carbon unit price. So in England, you've got the Woodland carbon guarantee, and we are exploring if we could potentially set up something similar for Peatlands. So yeah, here just my email account and our website. So if you have any questions, you can always drop me an email as well. Thank you very much. That's me.
Many thanks, Renee. Great. That was a great. We went from large-scale finance things and what is actually the concrete opportunities happening at the field level. We have a lot of verifying questions for Renee, and we have prepared some questions also for the audience as we discussed. So let us take for warm up. There were some questions. I would say this is directly for Renee, and I have others for other presenters after. There's a question about how do you account for the long-term permanence of resource areas after crediting has taken place after 5 years? That was for you. Thanks.
So our projects, we've got a minimum project duration of 30 years, and then projects can go, depending on how much peat that they've got, they can go up to 100 years. So the first verification is at year 5 after finishing restoration, but then it's every 10 years. So after that is at year 15, 25, and so on. So at that point, every time the independent auditor comes on site, checks that the site is still in a good condition, and that if that's the case, then the pending units of those blocks then get changed to verified units.
Yeah, we're using the same 30-year time span also in FAO's PGHG tool for Indonesia. Yeah, I think that was directly for you. There was a large scale. Let me show the questions that we had thought for this discussion today that we would like to ask from you all as well, and request your inputs through the chat. Sorry, my browser seems to take a long time as we're having the platform open. But we were curious about in this question of scaling up, and Hans's question there was exactly about the same topic as well. So if we need 125 billion, what you had calculated, Hans, how do we get to that level? Get to that level in general. So maybe I ask from Paul first, and then Diana, any suggestion how we could do that? Not an easy nut to crack. Over to you, Paul.
Well, 125 billion is 1,000 sustainability bonds, like the Sumatra bond. So that's not impossible. If every country did 10. Then you'd be covering that. But of course, you need also a system like the one that Renee described to be able to support actors all over the country. So the two working together would be really effective.
And then I hand over to just Diana. Do you want to have a word on that?
Well, I think it's the combination. I think that we've got to have the incentives. We've got to tie things together between the science and the economics. Quite often these things don't speak to each other. And governments also have to create platforms that are, going to create incentives, but disincentives and enforcement. And finally, we really need to get communities involved, and also a real true cost and benefit sharing. So the cost of the impact of some of these decisions are borne by local communities, but very few benefits. So a lot more equalization and working towards the SDGs in a broader sense is really important. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Diana. Here, therefore, we also talk a lot about combining funds. For example, when you have a large nationally appropriate mitigation action, for example, that you probably need to consider not only the private sector or the public sector funding, but also other types of funding sources, as we heard also today. Let me share just the questions that we wanted to ask from you. Let's have a look here. It very much on the same line of thought. So how can we best scale up the resources? And the second one is, if we would have $10 billion, what would we do to save the peatland landscapes and support livelihoods, basically their renewable resource development? If you have any thoughts about these, I would also put the responsibility to the audience. I see there were a lot of active inputs and thoughts already. And then the third one, how could the developing countries, especially thinking of Indonesia, the Congo, DRC, Peru, take advantage from these financial mechanisms, not only to promote peatland restoration and conservation, but also for different livelihood sources, paludiculture or other wet renewable resource production. And we, by the way, count there also fish. Then I see there's Paul has a question to René. How can the verification time be shortened if needed? Over to you, René.
So that I don't think that first verification can really be shortened. So that 5-year one, like you kind of need that 5 year to see how your site is behaving and that your restoration is most likely to be successful. Then afterwards, like at the moment, it is every 10 years. But if a project wants that earlier, they can do that. There's a cost associated with verification, though. So it depends on how many units there are, if that's attractive or not financially.
Thanks a lot. I wanted to ask if the speakers have noticed some questions you wanted me to ask from you, because there's no way to coordinate that here. There was the question from John. I'm just checking one question that we selected earlier. Sorry, I'm just between different screens and devices. There was also one. There was a question about the double counting as an issue, and for example, how in the UK you have regulated that or got around that one. If others want to share thoughts about this double counting as well, that would be welcome. Just raise your hand, for example. Over to you, René.
Okay, yeah, so I'm not entirely sure what kind of double counting is referred to here, but so every project that gets their units issued, all units have a serial number associated with it on the registry. So they cannot be issued twice or sold here but still there. So it really makes that I wouldn't say impossible, but very unlikely that would happen in that case. I'm not entirely sure if that's what was aimed at. But.
Hans, over to you. You have a comment on that.
No, I relate to the fact that if private companies invest in peatland rewetting, that the UK is also going to claim that under its nationally determined contributions. So that if the state has made a commitment to reduce and it is fulfilled by private companies, that actually you fulfill a task that the state has taken up. So you actually achieve nothing unless the state increases its commitments under the NDCs. So you should have a provision that everything that is invested by private companies or private people in peatland rewetting is not claimed by the state as the achievement of the state, but that it is added to the nationally determined contributions.
Okay, yeah, well, at the moment, all land-based emissions are in the inventory of the UK. they indeed have to report on those land-based emissions. So any emissions that are reduced on land will indeed be in that inventory. So if a company then pays to reduce peatland emissions, they have done that. It is real. They have made that. We've got the additionality test in place that if they wouldn't have put that money in, that project would not have gone ahead. So those reductions are real. So even if they are still in the inventory of the government,
no, because otherwise the state should have filled up this gap.
Yeah, but it's not enough public funding to actually do that.
You accept 85% of public funding for releasing 100% of carbon credits. So that is a substantial amount of public funding, I think. So that gives the state, of course, the right to do it. But compared to Germany, where we do not accept any public funding in carbon credits on the private market under more futures, this would completely skip the efforts of investors to invest in peatland rewetting, because simply the state would claim it as its achievement and not as the achievement of the company.
Yeah, this is indeed. I know we're almost up on the time, and I don't want to go too much, but I think we can take 5 more minutes. I hope the organizers will let me know if that's totally against the rules. But I think in general, yeah, that is indeed the issue from the private market. And then we often raise for example, we know countries who would be interested in using the carbon finance, but then they wouldn't be able to account for these emission reductions or avoided emissions in their nationally determined contributions. I don't know, Paul, did you have a comment on that? I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge for the governments to step out of the way and encourage companies to step in, and not to set up a situation where there's double counting happening. There is a lot more money in the corporate world than in the public world. So let's find a way to use it, and Indonesia is showing the way. If you think back to how the railways were developed, George Stephenson, didn't invent the railway. What he invented was the railway company that brought together the engineers, the financiers, and the legislators. And he created an instrument that allowed public and private investment to work, and it delivered 10,000 kilometres of railways in 10 years. That's what we have to do with carbon and with peatlands, and we can. I think we're not that far from it, and every country is experimenting in its own way.
Thanks a lot, Paul. I know you would have some positive note for this. I'm just going to show us, because we are going towards the end, some key messages that our speakers and we wrote together. This is a little bit long, but I would like to, before we close, before I go through these, verify if they're still valid. I would like to invite Diana, if you would like to summarize what would be your key take-home message from this session, and then I will go through the messages here and maybe we have time for other speakers as well, for a couple of words from you. Thanks a lot, Diana.
Maria. I suppose what we have to do is connect the dots, right? By raising the visibility of peatlands and the importance, which we've been doing, I think, quite well at least in this last push over the last years. We are getting the global commitment. We've got the United Nations Environment Assembly resolution. And we also see that banks, private banks, especially European banks, are lining up and saying, we want to have environmental indicators in our lending platforms. By showing these examples and also sharing those as a do-good examples, then hopefully we can inspire others to come along. But really, it's down to the public's choice. So we need to raise awareness on what are the impacts of their purchasing power. We also have a responsibility, the governments have a responsibility to take account both the conservation but also the restoration action around climate. But there's so much more than just climate and carbon that we're thinking of. And we also need to be more open and transparent about sharing experiences. And instead of working in competition, work together. I would say that that's really about how do we accelerate? We have to accelerate by adopting other practices and running with them, and also taking risks. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Diana. I will maybe quickly for Rene and then Paul, even if in a couple of words, if you want to say something, remember this, that would be great. Over to you, Rene.
Yeah, I think it's just very important that we do combine in the public and private funding to get to our goals and to make those two work together.
Thanks a lot. And maybe the practitioners have their role to play as well, the making good solutions together with the researchers of sustainable value chains that can fund themselves, right? Over to you, Paul.
So yeah, I'd just say that keep doing your projects at the scale of the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but also get together and start thinking about the $100 million and the landscapes and the decades, the generational timescale, because that's ready. There's the money out there. There's the people to help structure those sorts of deals. And what's really exciting is that we can put the environmental and social conditions into the commercial contracts, and you lose the money if you don't deliver. It's really powerful. It's much stronger than the world that we've been living in. So I'd invite everyone to step into it.
Thanks a lot. Doing this together, combining funding, I think those key messages were pretty clear. I don't even need to read this, what is here. I think we're up on our time. So I'm wishing you all a good lunch break, I suppose. And I hope you will be able to follow through the conference and Congress presentations over these days. Thank you, everybody. We'll submit these key messages to the presenters, and I think that's it. Oh, by the way, this session will be also posted to YouTube afterwards, so it will be also more widely available. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot for all the over 85 people who were online following today. And if you have any messages afterwards, please, you can feel free to stay online and put on the chat. We'll follow a couple of more minutes. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Maria.
Thanks a lot, speakers. Oh, that was wonderful. Thanks. You did very well.